What's up, everybody? Hope you are doing great and life is treating you well today. This is the Cuffin' Cowboy, and I've got a table cover now. Thanks to Vistaprint. Of course, I paid for it, but hey, you never know. Kind of like with hops, maybe if somebody's out there watching and want to send me some money, great. Anyway, back with the Shim and Wesson Shacklemen Challenge number 3. Big shout out to Not Too Dead for putting this challenge together. And for not asking us to use like Vaseline or sex lube or gasoline or acid or something like that, like we've seen with the first 2 challenges. So today's challenge is actually to pick a pair of Smith & Wesson handcuffs, actually to shim the cuffs. And wanted to point out a couple of things when you're thinking about this. It might seem pretty easy to just think, I can, put anything in there to shim the cuffs. This isn't actually the case. Smith & Wesson cuffs are pretty tight. Peerless cuffs have a little bit of give to them, and their ratcheting mechanism is a lot farther forward. So a lot of times with a pair of Peerless cuffs, it isn't so difficult as long as you get your shim down into the ratcheting mechanism correctly. It's not necessarily too difficult to get the cuffs to open without too much of a problem. And you see with that one, I barely had to get it down there, just probably a little bit of pressure onto the mechanism, and it popped open. It's one reason a lot of times when you see one of the hundreds of thousands of videos of people learning how to pick handcuffs, that you'll see them shimming a pair of Peerless cuffs, and typically when somebody's first learning how to pick Smith & Wesson cuffs, you'll typically see them going in through the keyhole, because the ratcheting mechanism is actually a lot farther forward and the key mechanism is actually on the front. So you can see, so they tend to be a little bit easier to defeat through the keyhole. Now, one thing you got to be careful on when you are shimming out through the mechanism is that you got to be careful, for one, about how much pressure you got to apply. I'm intentionally using this lockpick because it's actually, or this shim, because it's a little too thick, actually. But when you're picking through the ratchet mechanism, you got to be able to apply some pressure, and you don't want to end up in a situation like this where you end up with the cuff ratcheting way down on you and it's still not open. I mean, there we go. You want to be able to get it down in there to where it actually is safe to open. So you might be tempted, actually, let's go ahead and snap this one on. You might be tempted to use something like this. This is just a regular tension wrench, and it'll actually work pretty well on Peerless or a couple of other brand of cuffs. But it's just, even it is way too thick to get down into that mechanism. And you got to remember too that you've got to apply pressure down into the mechanism and the bow at the same time. So that can be extremely tricky. So even though this might look like a tempting thing to use, it's too long. You wouldn't want to try to do that, because this one in particular, because it is thin enough to fit down in there, but it's going to bend. So going back to this other one that is a little too tight or too thick, even right now I've got the cuff on basically too tight. You need to be able to fit a finger in there, so it's about there. But you don't want to end up in a situation where you get it in there and it's time to apply a little bit of pressure and it either won't move or it ratchets way down. I mean, you can see right there that it's way too tight. Now, fortunately, I did it correctly, so I didn't get stuck. But you can end up getting yourself in a pretty bad situation if you were to put the the ratchet down in there, the shim down in there, and you get it into place, and it's time to exert the pressure, and nothing happens. You wouldn't want to do that. You'd want to be really careful and with your placement. If you kind of went in sideways or something like that, and it kind of got jammed down in there, and then you got to try to apply the pressure, and next thing you know, you're in a situation like this where you are pretty jammed up. You can see my hand is already turning blue, which is not a good thing. You could hear even how the thing was broken. Of course, this is a lock picking channel, so I'm not going to use the handcuff key. But that is enough about handcuff safety, I guess, for one day. Let's go ahead and get the challenge that we've been asked to do. So, get my pick back. Alright, got the one. And the other, and the lockpick goes flying because we don't need it anymore. So, challenge to you. Look forward to seeing you do it. Have a good one now.